Wow, it is really bright up here. So I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to be here today to speak to you about this, because this is something that I really care about. And like others, I'm going to try really hard not to cry. So I think you guys all know that feeling when you find the one. And I'm not talking about romantic love, although of course that's pretty great. But I'm talking about when you find the thing that matters to you so much that you could talk about it all day long. And you could work on it, and it doesn't feel like work at all, but rather it feels like joy. And I think Joni said this pretty well yesterday when she said, do more work that doesn't feel like work. So this is what that is for me. So I'm going to talk to you today about disability, why it matters to me, why I think it should matter to you, and hopefully move us through this conversation down a pathway that helps us have better understanding for our patients with disabilities and may lead to a road that gives us cultural competence. So I want you to meet somebody who's pretty important to me in my life. She's cute, right? This is my daughter, Eliza. She's 5 years old, and she loves purple and pink, riding horses, and of course, unicorns. Her favorite fruit is chocolate. And for some reason, she really enjoys cooking and cleaning, which makes me wonder if she actually is my child. She is the oldest of my 3 kids by 1 minute over her twin brother, and she was born with spina bifida. She is a child like any other with what we like to call a few extras. She is not an angel, an inspiration, or a burden. She is not a special gift given to us because only we could handle it. There is nothing wrong with her, and she is not deficient. We've heard these terms from everyone from a random person on the street to medical professionals. And after hearing people struggle to find the right thing to say and coming up short, I've come to understand that we, as society in general, and we, in medicine in particular, do not feel comfortable interacting with or caring for people with disabilities. This is a commonly neglected topic in medical education. Moreover, it's often left out of the diversity conversation that we're having in this country right now. And because of Eliza, I know better. And so I have made this my mission and my passion. And I want to share with you a little bit about what I've learned, because I know that we can all do better. So I think if we're going to have a conversation about something, we have to start by thinking about what it is, and starting from the same page. I like this definition from the WHO, which says that disability is an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. And it is thus not just a health problem. In fact, in many cases, it may not be a health problem at all. It's a complex phenomenon reflecting the interaction of the person and the society in which they live. So I want to go over 2 models to understand disability with you, which, like any model, are somewhat overly simplistic, but I think are important to give us a framework of how we can understand disability. And because I'm the mother of 3 children, 5 and under, I like to relate everything in my life to Paw Patrol, potty training, and puzzles. So I'm going to use a shape sorter to try to describe these models to you. And as an aside on the topic of potty training, if any of you have great tips on that, please come up and see me afterward, because I did this once and I thought I knew what I was doing, but my 3-year-old is giving me a run for my money. So back to medical model. So the medical model of disability says that people are disabled by their impairments or differences, and that those impairments or differences should be changed or fixed by medical interventions in order to allow them to fit into society. It looks at what is wrong with the person and not at what the person needs. So in the shape sorter analogy, the medical model has really one side of a shape sorter, and there are 3 possible shapes that can fit in. If you come in a different shape, maybe you're a person with a disability, you need to be changed, or else you are not able to participate. In contrast, the social model of disability says that disability is caused by the way society is organized, rather than by a person's impairment or difference. It looks at what the person needs and not as what is wrong with them. And it focuses on removing barriers that restrict choice for people with disabilities. When those barriers are removed, people with disabilities can be free and independent and equal in society. In the shape sorter analogy, the social model has all 3 sides, allowing a much broader variety of shapes or people, including those with disabilities, to fit. I think that one of the best real-world examples of the social model of disability is the culturally deaf population. The culturally deaf population, when within their own community, do not have a disability. They are able to communicate and function quite effectively. But when they come out to interact with the hearing world, then they experience disability. Bringing these models back to my own life, a phrase that I have heard on many occasions is, "I don't know how you do it." And I absolutely know that people who say that to me have the best of intentions, but the impression it gives to me as the parent of a person with a disability is that disability is so bad and so other that you can't imagine or fathom what a life that included disability would be like. Another thing I hear a lot is, "Will she walk?" And I actually don't know if she will walk. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. But when people ask me that, to me that's typical medical model, because if any of you are parents, raise your hand if you're a parent. Yeah, I figured there were a few. You know that the question is not, will she walk? The question is, will she be happy? Will she love and be loved? Will she be fulfilled? Will she ever put together an outfit that does not pair stripes, polka dots, and flowers? These are really important questions. And whether she can walk does not determine the answer to it. At least I hope it doesn't, in the world that I want to live in. So there are so many reasons why we all should care about this. I've shared with you some of my so what, but I want to share with you a little bit more about why I think you all should care about this. And you're at this conference, so I'm thinking you probably care about equality and justice and doing what is right. And we, as medical professionals, are operating within a set of cultural values that discriminates in favor of able-bodied people. This is known as ableism, and it's all around you. If you like Twitter, you can search for the hashtag ableism exists, and you might see things like this. Ableism exists when your definition of diversity does not include disability. Ableism exists when people tell my boyfriend that they're proud of him for loving me no matter what, when I'm right there. It's 2016, and it's still legal in 48 states to pay disabled people less than minimum wage. Ableism exists. Peter Dinklage, one of the stars of Game of Thrones, has called jokes about people with dwarfism one of the last socially acceptable bastions of prejudice. President Trump made fun of a reporter with a disability to little consequence. After Stephen Hawking's death, the articles published about his life and his work were classic ableism. USA Today said, despite his physical ailments, he was known for a direct and dry wit, often combining the marvelous with the mundane. And my favorite, Fox News, said, he was paralyzed, but making constant contributions. There were memes like this one showing Stephen Hawking finally freed from the confines of his wheelchair and walking off into heaven. Contrast that with Hawking's own words, where he said, "My disabilities have not been a significant handicap in my field, which is theoretical physics. Indeed, they have helped me in a way by shielding me from lecturing and administrative work that I would otherwise have been involved in." That's awesome, right? It's pretty awesome. So I think some of these questions relate to the idea of quality of life, and I want to talk about that for a second. Because if you think about ableism and you think about the medical model, then you'll understand why studies show that there's a significant discrepancy between patients and physicians when it comes to quality of life assessments. I think one of the biggest biases we have about our patients who have disability or chronic medical illness is that they have a poor quality of life. And it's understandable that we have that, because where do we see them? We see them in the hospital. We see them on the worst days of their lives. We don't get the chance to interact with them outside of the hospital. And I used to think like this too. But we manifest that bias overtly through our language, through our discomfort with the interaction when caring for them, when sometimes we might avoid picking that patient up who has a disability and go for the easy chest pain instead. So we also manifest it, though, discreetly through our thoughts. And we think things like, instead of feeling empathy, we feel pity. Or we wonder whether that person with a disability who's severely disabled, is their life really worth saving? And so if you look at quality of life from the medical model, that's what you see. You see things like my daughter has had 12 surgeries, and she has number 13 coming up in a couple of weeks. She sees 8 pediatric subspecialists, and she has a list of diagnoses that would fill an entire page on your EMR. She has 2 sets of leg braces, an arm brace, a TLSO brace, 2 wheelchairs, a walker, a mobile stander, and a partridge in a pear tree. But when you think about life from the social model, you see a different picture. You see a picture that puts the person back into it. And quality of life is not determined in the hospital, but quality of life is determined in the home. And that cute little redhead is the potty training challenger, by the way. So finally, the last point I want to leave you with before we move on to what we can do to make this better is that our patients recognize that we have these biases. And even if they don't call us out on it, patients with disabilities do avoid medical care at times because they are afraid of how their physicians will treat them, like other disadvantaged groups. And patients with disabilities experience worse health outcomes and poor access to care. And so if we want to make change, then we need to be the change. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what disability is and what are the models for understanding it, let's talk about what are some things that we can do to make this better. We can learn about disability, culture, and values so that we can show our patients we understand their perspective and their priorities and build a better therapeutic alliance. We can use appropriate language. I'm going to go over quickly some things to say and not to say. And finally, include disability in the conversation. Think about ways in which you can include disability in your practice, in your community. So let's start. I'm going to go over a few of the values of disability culture. And one of the things I think is interesting is that this is not an exhaustive list, but these values actually seem to really mesh with the values that we hold dear in emergency medicine. So see if you agree. An acceptance of human differences, a tolerance for lack of resolution or cure, and dealing with the unpredictable, a sense of humor about disability, flexible, adaptive, resourceful approaches to tasks and problems, and interdependence valued more than independence. That last one really hits home for me, especially being here at this conference, because isn't that what we're all trying to do? We're trying to build connection. We're all getting on the raft together, right? And maybe the disability community has had this figured out for a while, and we can learn something from them. So what about language? I really believe that words have power and words matter, so I'm really glad I got to go after Natalie, because she made that point pretty clear. So the language we use when speaking to people with disabilities really has the power to have significant impact, whether positive or negative. So you heard me speak a little bit about some of the language that's been used around my daughter in the beginning, and these are all words that I've heard in reference to her. She is disabled. She is crippled. She is an invalid. She is afflicted. She is special. She is inspirational. She is wheelchair-bound. She is handicapped. When referring to her twin brother, they'll call him the normal one. What is normal? Who is normal? I think the thing that these words all have in common is that they objectify people with disabilities, and they place a value that is not appropriate, whether positive or negative. Let me offer you some new language. In general, use person-first language when speaking to or about people with disabilities. That means that they are a person with a disability and not a disabled person. We put the person first. This is a generalization, and there are some populations that do actually prefer disability-first language. For example, the culturally deaf population with a capital D, and some people with autism actually do prefer the term autistic person. If you aren't sure what language to use, you can take a tip from Shana yesterday and just ask. When referring to places of accommodation for people with disabilities, use accessible rather than handicapped. Handicapped is not a property of a person or of a place. If you're going to use handicapped, you should use it as a verb, like a person who is blind is handicapped by the lack of braille on the light switches. Accessible is pretty easy to say. My 5-year-old Eliza's twin brother the other day said, "Mom, are there any accessible parking spaces?" And I was like, yes, I have succeeded. And finally, try using wheelchair user instead of wheelchair bound. Eliza has never been tied to her wheelchair, although I'm pretty sure her brothers would try it if they thought they could get away with it. Wheelchairs are tools of mobility and freedom. A wheelchair allows Eliza to be independent and free, and it does not make me feel sad. She can chase her brothers around a park. She can take a peek in the pantry and sneak some snacks. We don't need to apply terms of negativity and limits to things that are good. How many of you wear glasses? Yeah, me too, although I'm wearing contacts today. And I'm pretty myopic. I can see like this far in front of my face without any help. And how do you think about yourself in your glasses or your contacts? Are you a glasses wearer or a glasses user? Or are you glasses bound? Are you afflicted by myopia? Have you overcome your nearsightedness? Or are you inspirational for going to the store while wearing your glasses? Glasses are assistive technology, like wheelchairs and hearing aids and walkers and so many other things. And yet we choose to editorialize some and not others. So finally, let's include disability in the conversation. When you leave here today, think about ways in which you can be more inclusive in your educational, clinical, or research structures to include this population. Now, when you're 5, like Eliza, you can advocate for things like inclusive playgrounds, like you see her doing here. Or you have a greater power to advocate. So maybe you could advocate for more emergency physicians with disabilities, like Elise mentioned yesterday. Or maybe you could advocate for changes in your emergency department to make it a more inclusive place for people with disabilities. More gurneys instead of exam tables, in-person sign language interpreters, transport after hours for people who use power wheelchairs, recorded discharge instructions for people who cannot read or who cannot see. And you can educate. So I don't think she's really educating him. She's like drawing a picture of a rainbow or something. But you can educate your residents, your medical students, your nurses, so that when they present a patient to you and they refer to that patient as handicapped or wheelchair bound, you can correct them. You can educate yourself so that you better understand this population and the challenges that they face. And if you're involved in curriculum development at your school, within your group, maybe you could think about including this topic, which is clearly underrepresented. So over the last 15 minutes, you've seen a lot of pictures of what I think is a pretty adorable kid. And you may think that you came to the Eliza Poffenberger slideshow rather than a talk at FIX. But I did that on purpose because when you make a connection to something and it's personal to you, then we all know that it matters more. And so you may not know someone personally with a disability, but now you know Eliza. And when you know better, you do better. She's counting on you. Thank you.